The RPG screamed across the valley and turned the lead Humvee into a fireball. Staff Sergeant Diego Carrera was still processing the orange bloom of the explosion when the second rocket hit the rear vehicle, trapping the convoy in a perfect kill box. 47 Marines. No cover. Gunfire erupting from 3 directions. This was not contact. This was execution. Carrera threw himself behind the engine block of the nearest vehicle as rounds sparked off metal and shattered glass rained down around him. His ears were ringing. His mind was racing. Somewhere to his left, a young Marine was screaming for a corpsman. Somewhere ahead, the driver of the lead vehicle was burning alive, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from. Maybe you know someone who served in Afghanistan, someone who understands what these valleys can become. The ambush was textbook. Ridge lines on both sides, abandoned village providing cover for the enemy, and a convoy stretched out along 600 meters of exposed road with nowhere to go. Whoever planned this knew exactly where they would be and exactly when they would arrive. Lance Corporal Thandai Mbeki pressed herself against a blown tire, her rifle up but her hands shaking. She was 22 years old, 18 months in the Corps, and she had never seen anything like this. Muzzle flashes winked from doorways and rooftops like deadly fireflies. Every time she tried to return fire, a burst of rounds would drive her back down. Gunnery Sergeant Felix Brennan was shouting orders, trying to establish a perimeter, trying to turn chaos into something resembling a defensive position. But they were pinned. The Taliban had the high ground, the numbers, and the element of surprise. This was not a firefight. This was a slaughter in progress. Then the machine gun nest on the eastern ridge went silent. Carrera saw it happen. One moment the PKM was hammering their position, green tracers slicing through the dust. The next moment the gunner's head snapped back and he crumpled over his weapon. The sound of a shot reached them a full second later, a distant crack that echoed off the valley walls. 750 meters, maybe more, and the convoy had no sniper support assigned to this mission. Private First Class Damon Holt was frozen behind a wheel well, his rifle unfired, his face pale beneath the Afghan dust. He was the nephew of Captain Vernon Holt, sent to theater for a combat deployment that was supposed to be safe, supposed to pad his record for a career that had already been mapped out by family connections. Nothing about this moment had been in the plan. Another shot. Another Taliban fighter dropped mid-stride as he moved between positions. This one was closer, maybe 500 meters, and the round had threaded between 2 Marines to find its target without endangering friendlies. Whoever was shooting knew exactly what they were doing. Brennan grabbed the radio handset. Copperhead Main, this is Dagger 2-6. Troops in contact, grid follows. We have casualties. Requesting immediate QRF and air support. Break. The response crackled through static. Dagger 2-6, Copperhead Main copies. QRF spinning up. ETA, 45 minutes. No air assets available at this time. Hold your position. 45 minutes. They would be dead in 15. A third shot took out a Taliban RPG team that had been setting up for another volley. The rocket fell from the dead fighter's hands, skittering across the rocks without detonating. Carrera watched it happen through a gap in the vehicles, and something cold moved through his chest. He knew that shot. He knew the timing, the precision, the almost supernatural patience between trigger pulls. He had spent 18 months as a spotter watching someone shoot exactly like that. But she was gone. 3 weeks ago, Captain Holt had personally escorted her off the FOB. Misconduct charges. Insubordination. Conduct unbecoming. Her career destroyed by allegations that came from nowhere and evidence that nobody could quite explain. Gunnery Sergeant Yara Okonkwo. Call sign Ghost. The woman who had taught Carrera everything he knew about precision shooting. The woman he had watched get railroaded without saying a word in her defense. She cannot be here. She was supposed to be stateside, processing out of the Corps she had given 14 years of her life. She was supposed to be gone. Another shot. Another dead enemy. And somewhere on a ridge that had been marked clear on every operations brief, someone was saving their lives one trigger pull at a time. Fanny had noticed it too. She caught Carrera's eye across the chaos, her expression shifting from terror to confusion to something that looked almost like hope. She had idolized Ghost, had begged to be assigned to her section, had cried actual tears the day they took her away. The shooting style was unmistakable. The rhythm between shots. The target selection prioritizing threats to friendlies. The almost lazy patience of someone who had all the time in the world while everyone around her was panicking. Brennan was still working the radio, still trying to coordinate a defense that was barely holding. He had not noticed the pattern yet. He had not served with Ghost long enough to recognize her signature in the chaos. But Carrera knew, and the knowledge was tearing him apart, because if she was here, it meant she had never left. It meant she had stayed in theater unofficially, watching over a unit that had abandoned her. It meant everything he had believed about her removal was a lie. The gunfire continued. The Taliban were regrouping, adjusting to the unexpected sniper threat. And, through his rifle scope, Carrera caught a glimpse of something on the eastern ridge that made his blood freeze. Captain Holt was not in the convoy. He had been scheduled to ride in the command vehicle. He had been on the manifest. But when Carrera thought back to the moment they rolled out, he realized he had not actually seen the captain board. Holt was back at the FOB, safe, while 47 Marines were dying in a valley that someone had known would become their grave. Another shot echoed across the rocks. Another enemy fell, and Carrera understood that whoever was on that ridge was not just saving their lives. She was trying to tell them something. 3 weeks earlier, Gunnery Sergeant Yara Okonkwo had stood at attention in Captain Vernon Holt's office while he read the charges against her. His voice had been calm, almost sympathetic, the voice of a man who was very sorry that duty required him to destroy someone's life. Inappropriate relationships with subordinates. Falsifying range reports. Insubordination during operational briefings. The allegations had appeared from nowhere, supported by statement from Marines she had never spoken to and documentation she had never seen. Yara had not blinked. She had not defended herself. She had simply stared at a point on the wall behind Holt's head and understood exactly what was happening. 2 days before the charges appeared, she had submitted a report to battalion intelligence. Patrol routes were being compromised. 3 ambushes in 2 months, all on missions where the operational security should have been airtight. Someone was feeding information to the enemy, and the pattern pointed directly at the captain's office. Holt had smiled when he dismissed her, a small, satisfied expression that never reached his eyes. He had told her that her service record would reflect an honorable discharge, that there was no need for this to follow her into civilian life. He had told her she should be grateful. Staff Sergeant Carrera had watched her walk to the transport bird. He had stood there with his hands at his sides and his mouth closed, too afraid of what defending her might cost him. Lance Corporal Fandy had been crying, had tried to approach, but Yara had shaken her head. A single small motion that said stay away from this. Gunnery Sergeant Brennan had not even come to see her off. He had believed the charges, or at least he had chosen to believe them because believing was easier than asking questions. The helicopter had lifted off and carried Yara Okonkwo away from the Marines she had spent 3 years training, protecting, and leading into the worst places on Earth. And nobody had said a word in her defense. But Yara had not gone home. The transport had taken her to Kandahar, where she was supposed to catch a flight to Kuwait and then stateside. Instead, she had disappeared into the sprawling chaos of the airfield, called in favors from contacts she had cultivated over 14 years in the Corps, and made her way back to Helmand Province as a ghost. She had known something was coming. The ambushes were not random. They were building towards something larger, something that would get Marines killed in numbers that could not be ignored. And Holt was at the center of it. For 3 weeks, she had shadowed her old unit, sleeping in abandoned compounds, moving at night, watching through her scope as the men and women she had trained went about their missions without knowing she was there. She had gathered evidence when she could, photographs of Holt meeting with contractors from Blackridge Security, recordings of radio transmissions that did not match official logs. And she had waited for the trap she knew was coming. Now, Lying prone on a ridge that overlooked the Sanjin Valley, Yara settled her breathing and put another round through a Taliban fighter who was trying to flank the convoy's southern position. The M40A5 rifle was not her issued weapon. It was a backup she had cached months ago, part of an emergency kit she maintained for situations exactly like this one. Through the scope, she could see Carrera directing fire from behind an engine block. She could see Thandie pulling a wounded Marine to cover. She could see Brennan trying to hold the line with the desperate energy of a man who was watching his command die around him. They were her Marines. Even now, even after everything, they were still hers. The radio on her vest crackled with traffic from the convoy. Panicked voices calling for support. Brennan demanding status updates. And beneath it all, the calm, measured tone of Captain Holtback at FOB Copperhead, assuring everyone that help was on the way. Yara's jaw tightened. Holt had not ridden with the convoy. He had found an excuse at the last minute, some administrative emergency that required his presence at the FOB. He had sent 47 Marines into a valley that he knew was a kill zone, and he had stayed behind where it was safe. She shifted her position slightly, scanning for new threats. The Taliban were regrouping, pulling back to reassess now that their machine gun nests and RPG teams were being systematically eliminated. They had not expected a sniper. Their intelligence had told them the convoy would be alone. That intelligence had come from Holt. Yara was certain of it. Another fighter broke cover, sprinting toward a compound that would give him a clear shot at the convoy's medical position. Yara tracked him for half a second, led the target by the appropriate distance, and squeezed. The round covered 600 meters in less than a second. The fighter dropped mid-stride and did not move again. Somewhere below, she heard Thandie's voice on the radio. That shot came from the East Ridge. Overwatch position. But we do not have anyone up there. Brennan's response was sharp. Then who the hell is shooting? Carrera did not answer. But Yara saw him turn toward her position, his face unreadable at this distance, but his body language speaking volumes. He knew. On some level, he had always known she would not abandon them. She allowed herself one moment of something that might have been gratitude. Then she pushed it aside and returned to the scope. The Taliban were massing for another push. She counted at least 30 fighters still active, plus an unknown number in the village compound. The convoy had maybe 20 Marines still combat effective. The math was not good. And then she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. On the northern ridge, movement. Not Taliban. The silhouettes were wrong, the equipment too modern. For figures in black tactical gear, moving with the precision of trained operators. Blackridge Security. Holt's private military contacts. And they were not heading toward the convoy. They were heading toward her position. Yara understood immediately. This ambush was not just about killing Marines. It was about creating a crisis that Blackridge could solve, a rescue that would justify their presence and their contracts. But somewhere along the way, Holt had realized she was still in theater, still watching, still gathering evidence. Now, he was cleaning up loose ends. She had maybe 15 minutes before the contractors reached her ridge. 15 minutes to keep her Marines alive while death approached from two directions. Yara chambered another round and made her choice. She was not leaving. Not until every one of her people made it out of that valley. And not until Vernon Holt understood exactly what it meant to make an enemy of a ghost. The Taliban pushed again, and the valley erupted with fresh gunfire. Yara counted 8 fighters advancing through a dry stream bed that would bring them within grenade range of the convoy's southern flank. She dropped the first 2 in rapid succession, worked the bolt, and took a third as he tried to reverse course. The remaining 5 scattered into cover, their advance broken but not stopped. Her ammunition was becoming a problem. She had started with 40 rounds. 18 remained. At the current rate of fire, she would be empty in less than 10 minutes, and the Blackridge contractors were still working their way toward her position. Below, Gunnery Sergeant Brennan had finally gotten the Marines organized in something resembling a defensive perimeter. The wounded were consolidated behind the heaviest vehicle, with 2 corpsmen working frantically to keep men alive who should already be dead. The able-bodied had established interlocking fields of fire that were making the Taliban pay for every meter of ground. But it was not enough. The enemy had numbers and position. All they had to do was wait for the Americans to run out of ammunition, and then it would be over. Private First Class Damon Holt had found his courage somewhere in the chaos. Yara watched him through her scope as he sprinted across open ground to recover a fallen Marine's weapon and ammunition, rounds kicking up dust at his heels. He made it to cover somehow, breathing hard, his hands shaking as he distributed magazines to the Marines around him. He was not his uncle. Whatever Vernon Holt had become, the nephew was just a scared young man trying to do the right thing in a situation that should never have existed. Yara filed that observation away and returned her attention to the threat. Carrera had worked his way to the radio, was trying to raise anyone, who could provide support faster than the 45-minute QRF estimate. His voice was steady, but Yara could hear the strain beneath it. He knew the mathematics as well as she did. Copperhead, Maine, Dagger 2-6. We need air support. Anything you have. We are combat ineffective in 15 mics without intervention. Over. The response came from Captain Holt himself, his tone carrying that particular blend of concern and authority that Yara had learned to recognize as performance. Dagger 2-6, Copperhead, Maine actual. Air assets are being diverted from a priority mission. Best estimate is 30 minutes. Continue to hold. QRF ish en route. Help is coming. Help is coming. Yara had heard those words before, in a different valley, on a different day. She had heard them while her spotter bled out beside her, while she waited for extraction that arrived 20 minutes too late. Help is coming meant nothing when people were dying. She shifted her position and scanned the northern ridge. The Black Ridge contractors had made good time. 3 of them were now within 500 meters of her location, moving tactically, using the terrain like professionals. The 4th had disappeared, probably circling to cut off her escape route. They were not amateurs. These were former special operations, men who had traded their uniforms for paychecks that did not ask questions about methods or morality. They would not underestimate her. Yara made a decision. She keyed her radio to an emergency frequency that was monitored by all units in theater, took a breath, and spoke. Any call sign this net. This is a friendly sniper providing overwatch for Dagger Convoy. Be advised, hostile QRF inbound from the north. Recommend Dagger element verify identity of any responding forces before allowing approach. How copy? The radio exploded with crosstalk. Brennan demanding identification. Holt's voice cutting through, sharp with something that sounded almost like panic. Carrera trying to establish order. Yara did not identify herself. Not yet, but she had planted the seed. When Blackridge arrived to play hero, the Marines would be watching. Through her scope, she saw Thandy grab Carrera's arm and point toward the eastern ridge. Toward her position. The young Lance Corporal was talking fast, her expression animated, and Carrera was nodding slowly. They were putting it together. Another wave of Taliban fighters emerged from the village compound. This group was larger, at least 15 men, and they were moving with renewed aggression. Someone had told them the sniper was running low on ammunition. Someone had told them to press the attack now. Yara did not have enough rounds to stop them all. She prioritized ruthlessly. The fighter carrying the RPG went down first, then the one with the PKM, then the squad leader who was directing movement with hand signals. Each shot bought the convoy another few seconds, but the advance continued. Brennan was screaming into the radio now. Dagger element. All call signs, stand by to repel assault. Fixe bayonets. Fixe bayonets. The order that meant ammunition was critical and close combat was imminent. The order that meant men were about to die with knives in their hands because there was nothing else left. Yara fired again. Another Taliban dropped. 11 rounds remaining. On the northern ridge, the Blackridge contractors had reached a position overlooking her hide site. She caught the glint of optics, the subtle movement of a rifle barrel being positioned. They had found her. She had seconds to decide. Stay and keep shooting until the contractors killed her, or displace and abandon the convoy to the assault. It was not a choice at all. Yara rolled left as the first round cracked past her head, showering her with rock fragments. She came up in a crouch, acquired the contractor's position through her scope, and returned fire. The shot was rushed, imperfect, but it forced him into cover and bought her a moment. She was moving before the echo faded, scrambling across the ridge toward a secondary position she had identified days ago. Behind her, more rounds impacted where she had been lying. The contractors were good, but she had been doing this for 14 years, in places that made Afghanistan look like a training exercise. Below, the convoy was fighting for its life. Above, professional killers were hunting her across the rocks. And somewhere safe behind walls and radios, Vernon Holt was listening to it all unfold, waiting to see which way the bodies fell. Yara reached her secondary position and dropped prone, breathing hard, her arms screaming where a rock fragment had opened a gash across her bicep. Blood was soaking into her sleeve, but the wound could wait. She raised her rifle and found a Taliban fighter who had reached the convoy's perimeter, who was raising his weapon toward Thandi's exposed back. 10 rounds remaining. She squeezed the trigger. 9 rounds remaining. And the contractor team was already moving to flank her new position. The contractor on her left flank made his move first. Yara saw him rise from cover, rifle shouldered, moving with the fluid confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. He was good, fast, professional, but he had made the mistake of assuming she would stay focused on the valley below. She pivoted, acquired, and fired in a single motion. The round took him center mass, and he went down hard, his weapon clattering across the rocks. 8 rounds remaining. Return fire came immediately from 2 directions. Yara flattened herself against the stone as bullets cracked overhead, close enough that she could feel the pressure waves against her skin. The remaining contractors had her position bracketed. Moving would expose her. Staying would let them close the distance. Below, the convoy was holding. Barely. Brennan had pulled the perimeter tight, concentrating firepower on the approaches that mattered most. Marines were fighting with the desperate efficiency of men who knew that survival depended on every trigger pull counting. Thandi had taken position behind a shattered vehicle door, her rifle steady now, the shaking gone from her hands. She was dropping Taliban fighters with the precision that Ghost had drilled into her during countless range sessions. The student was honoring the teacher, even if she did not yet know the teacher was watching. Yara keyed her radio again, same emergency frequency. Dagger element be advised. You have friendly sniper taking fire from hostile contractors on the North Ridge. These are not Taliban. Repeat, North Ridge contacts are not Taliban. They are private military. Verify all approaching forces. This time she heard Carrera's voice cut through the chaos. Authenticate. Who is this? Identify yourself. She could not. Not yet. If Holt knew for certain she was alive and in theater, he would have every resource at his disposal hunting her. The contractors were bad enough. She needed to stay a ghost until the moment was right. The radio crackled with Holt's response, smooth and dismissive. All call signs disregard that transmission. We have no friendly snipers in the AO. Unknown station is attempting to create confusion. Continue mission. But the seed was planted. Yara could see it in the way Brennan paused, the way his head turned toward the northern ridge, where muzzle flashes were visible against the rocks. He could see the firefight happening above the valley. He could see that someone was shooting at their mysterious savior, and Vernon Holt had just told him to ignore it. A round sparked off the stone inches from Yara's face, driving fragments into her cheek. She rolled right, came up shooting, and forced the nearest contractor back into cover. 7 rounds. The third contractor was circling wide, trying to get above her. She could track his movement by the occasional displacement of rocks, the subtle disturbance of dust. He was patient, methodical, willing to take his time because he knew she was pinned. In the valley, the Taliban assault had stalled. The combination of concentrated Marine firepower and Yara's precision shooting had broken their momentum. Bodies littered the approaches to the convoy, and the survivors were pulling back toward the village to regroup. It was a temporary reprieve. They would come again, and when they did, Yara might not have any ammunition left to help. She checked her wound. The gash on her arm had clotted, the bleeding slowed to a seep. It would need stitches and antibiotics, but it would not kill her. Not today. The contractor above her made his move. She heard the scrape of boot on rock, the subtle shift of weight that preceded violence. Yara did not have time to aim properly. She twisted, pointed the rifle in his direction, and fired twice. One round missed. The other caught him in the leg, and he went down screaming, his weapon flying from his grip. 5 rounds remaining. The fourth contractor opened fire immediately, suppressing her position while his wounded teammate crawled toward cover. Yara pressed herself into a crevice in the rocks, making herself as small as possible, counting the seconds between bursts. Then she heard it, the distinctive sound of rotor blades in the distance, growing closer. The Blackridge helicopter, coming to play hero for the convoy, while the ground team eliminated the witness who could expose everything. Yara made a decision that went against every instinct she had developed over 14 years of combat. She keyed her radio and spoke clearly, knowing that Holt would hear every word. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Yara Okonkwo. Call sign Ghost. I am providing overwatch for Dagger Convoy from the Eastern Ridge. Captain Vernon Holt has been selling patrol routes to private military contractors. This ambush was planned. The QRF helicopter approaching is Blackridge security, not military. Do not let them land near the convoy. I have evidence. Holt is a traitor." Silence on the net. Complete, absolute silence. Then Holt's voice, barely controlled. "That Marine was discharged 3 weeks ago for misconduct. She's not in theater. This is Taliban's psychological operations. All call signs, ignore this transmission." But it was too late. Yara had said her name. She had said her call sign. And every Marine in that convoy who had served with her, who had trained with her, who had watched her shoot impossible shots for 3 years, knew that no Taliban impersonator could fake what they had witnessed today. Carrera's voice came over the radio, steady and certain. "Ghost, this is Dagger 27. I copy all. What do you need?" Yara allowed herself one breath of something that might have been relief. Then the Blackridge helicopter crested the ridge, Dorganer already scanning for targets, and she understood that the real fight was just beginning. "Keep that bird off the convoy," she transmitted. "I'm coming down." She had 5 rounds, 1 functioning arm, and a quarter-mile of hostile terrain between her and her Marines. It would have to be enough. Yara moved through the rocks like water, low and fast, using every fold in the terrain to shield herself from the helicopter circling above. The Blackridge bird was a modified Black Hawk, civilian registration, but military capability. The Dorganer was sweeping the ridge with a mounted M240, searching for the woman who had just exposed their operation to every Marine in the valley. If he found her, the heavy rounds would tear through rock and flesh without distinction. She had descended 200 meters when the fourth contractor found her. He came from behind a boulder, moving fast, and Yara barely got her rifle up in time to block the strike aimed at her head. The impact knocked the weapon from her grip and sent it clattering down the slope, disappearing into a crevice she would never reach in time. The contractor was bigger than her by 60 pounds, trained in close combat, and he was not interested in taking prisoners. His second strike caught her across the jaw and sent her stumbling backward, stars exploding across her vision. Yara had been fighting since she was 7 years old. Not because she wanted to, but because the Third War did not give little girls the option of being soft. She had learned early that size meant nothing if you were faster, meaner, and more willing to do what the moment required. She let the momentum of his punch carry her backward, then reversed direction and drove her knee into his thigh, targeting the nerve cluster that would deaden the leg. He grunted, shifted his weight, and she was already inside his guard, her elbow connecting with his throat. He staggered. She did not give him time to recover. Her knife was in her hand without conscious thought, the blade her father had carried in Somalia, and she put it through his neck before he could raise his arms to defend himself. He fell against her, heavy and twitching, and Yara held him until the movement stopped. Then she lowered him to the ground and retrieved her knife. For contractors down, but she had lost her rifle, her ammunition was gone, and the helicopter was still hunting. She pressed herself against the rocks, as the Black Hawk swept overhead, close enough that the rotor wash tore at her clothes and filled her eyes with dust. The door gunner was facing the other direction, scanning the wrong sector, and then the bird was past, and she was moving again. The convoy was 500 meters below. She could see Marines taking cover as the helicopter circled, could see Brennan on the radio, trying to establish whether the aircraft was friendly or hostile. Holt's voice was on the net, insisting that Blackridge was there to help, ordering the Marines to mark a landing zone. Nobody was moving to comply. Carrera had spread the word. Ghost was alive. Ghost was on that ridge. And Captain Holt had tried to have her killed. Yara was 200 meters from the valley floor when she heard the scream. It came from the convoy, high and desperate, the sound of a young man in more pain than his mind could process. She increased her pace, sliding down a scree slope that tore at her palms and knees, and broke through the final line of rocks to see what had happened. Lance Corporal Elijah Rosewood was 19 years old. He had joined the Marines because his father and grandfather had served, because he believed in something bigger than himself, because he wanted to matter. He had been providing cover fire from behind a disabled Humvee when a Taliban round found a gap in his body armor. Thandi was holding him now, pressing her hands against the wound in his abdomen, screaming for a corpsman who was already working on 3 other casualties. Blood was pooling beneath them, too much blood, and Rosewood was looking up at the Afghan sky with eyes that were starting to lose focus. Yara reached them in seconds, dropping to her knees beside Thandi, her hands joining the pressure on the wound. She had seen this before. She knew what it meant. "Tell my mom," Rosewood whispered. "Tell her I was brave." "You're going to tell her yourself," Thandi said, but her voice was breaking and they all knew she was lying. Yara leaned close, looked into the boy's eyes, held his gaze the way her grandmother had taught her to hold the dying, so they would not have to leave alone. "You were brave," she said quietly. "You are brave. Your family will know. I promise." Rosewood tried to smile, made halfway, then his eyes fixed on something none of them could see, and Lance Corporal Elijah Rosewood, 19 years old, was gone. Thandi made a sound that was not quite a scream and not quite a sob. Yara pulled her close, held her for a moment, and then gently pushed her back. "Mourn later," she said. "Fight now. He needs you to fight now." Thandi looked at her, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face, and something hardened behind her eyes. She nodded once, picked up her rifle, and moved back to the perimeter. Yara stood and surveyed the situation. The convoy had taken heavy losses. At least 8 dead, another dozen wounded. The Taliban had pulled back, but they were still out there, regrouping, waiting. The Blackridge helicopter was circling like a vulture, and Vernon Holt was still on the radio insisting that everyone trust the people who had been sent to kill her. She had no rifle, no ammunition, nothing but a knife and 14 years of training. Brennan appeared beside her, his face gray with exhaustion and something that looked like shame. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then he held out a rifle, an M4 with a full magazine, taken from one of the fallen. "Ghost," he said quietly, "I am sorry. I should have believed you. I should have stood with you." Yara took the weapon and checked the chamber. "Later," she said. "Apologies later. Right now we need to survive." She looked up at the circling helicopter, then out at the village where Taliban fighters were massing for another push. "First," she said, "we deal with that bird. Then we deal with Holt." The helicopter banked toward the convoy, Dorganer taking aim, and Yara understood that the next few minutes would determine whether any of them made it home. The Blackridge helicopter made its decision. The Dorganer opened fire on the convoy, rounds stitching across the dirt and sparking off vehicle armor as Marines dove for cover. There was no pretense anymore, no theater of rescue. Holt had given the order, and now private contractors were shooting at American service members in broad daylight. Yara pulled Brennan behind a disabled truck as the M240 swept their position. The heavy rounds punched through the thinner panels, filling the air with metal fragments and the screams of men who had trusted the wrong people. Carrera was already moving, sprinting toward the vehicle that mounted their only heavy weapon. It was a .50 caliber machine gun, belt-fed, capable of reaching the helicopter if he could get operational. The problem was that it sat on top of an exposed turret with no cover from aerial fire. "Give me suppression," he shouted. Marines along the perimeter opened up with rifles, their rounds sparking uselessly against the helicopter's armored hull, but forcing the door gunner to shift his attention. Carrera climbed into the turret, racked the charging handle, and swung the barrel toward the sky. The .50 caliber roared to life, its thunder drowning out everything else in the valley. Tracer rounds reached toward the Black Hawk like angry red fingers, and the pilot banked hard to avoid the stream of fire. The door gunner tried to acquire Carrera, but the helicopter was moving too erratically now, survival taking priority over attack. For a moment, it looked like they might actually drive the bird off. Then an RPG streaked up from the village, fired by a Taliban fighter who had seen an opportunity to kill Americans regardless of who else was shooting at them. The rocket missed the helicopter by inches and exploded against the ridge behind it, but the pilot panicked. The Black Hawk lurched sideways, lost altitude, and the door gunner tumbled from his position, falling 60 feet to the rocks below. The helicopter spun once, twice, the pilot fighting for control, and then it was climbing away, retreating toward the FOB with smoke trailing from somewhere near the tail rotor. The immediate threat was gone, but Yara knew it would be back. Holt would not give up that easily. Brennan grabbed her arm. "How did you know? How did you know about Holt?" "Because I am not stupid," Yara said. 3 ambushes in 2 months. All on missions with restricted route information. All in locations that just happened to have Black Ridge teams nearby for rescue. The pattern was obvious if you were willing to see it. And the evidence you mentioned on the radio. Yara reached into the cargo pocket of her pants and pulled out a small hard drive, wrapped in plastic and tape. Photographs, recorded transmissions, financial records showing payments from Black Ridge to accounts connected to Holt's family. "I've been building this for 3 weeks. Brennan stared at her. "You stayed. You were supposed to be gone, and you stayed." Yara met his eyes. "You are my Marines. All of you. Even the ones who did not stand up for me. Did you think I would let you die because my feelings were hurt?" Before Brennan could respond, Carrera jumped down from the turret and approached at a run. His face was pale beneath the dust and smoke. "Gunny, we have a problem. I just monitored Black Ridge frequency. They are not retreating. They are repositioning to block the road back to Copperhead." The words hit Yara like a physical blow. She understood immediately what it meant. Holt was not just trying to silence her anymore. He was trying to eliminate all the witnesses. Every Marine in this convoy who had heard her accusation, who had seen the helicopter open fire on Americans, who could testify to what happened in this valley. "He is going to kill everyone," she said quietly. Thandia joined them, her rifle still in her hands, Rosewood's blood still drying on her uniform. "That is insane. He cannot cover up the death of an entire convoy." "He does not have to cover it up," Yara replied. "He just has to control the narrative." Taliban ambush. Everyone killed. Tragic loss. Black Ridge tried to help but arrived too late. Who is going to contradict him if we are all dead? The silence that followed was absolute. Every Marine within earshot understood what they were facing now. This was not about survival anymore. This was about whether the truth would ever make it out of this valley. Brennan's jaw tightened. "What do we need to do?" Yara looked around at the battered convoy, the wounded Marines, the exhausted fighters who had been holding on by their fingernails for the past hour. She thought about Rosewood dying in Thandi's arms. She thought about her father's knife, still wet with contractor blood. She thought about 14 years of service to a corps that had allowed one corrupt officer to destroy everything she had built. "First, we need to get this evidence out," she said. "If it reaches battalion, if Major Chin sees what I have, Holt is finished regardless of what happens to us." The radio on Brennan's vest crackled with a new voice. Not Holt this time. This was Major Cassandra Chun, the battalion intelligence officer who had been suspicious of Holt for months. "Dagger Element, this is Sentinel 6. I am monitoring this frequency, and I have heard the transmissions. I am en route with actual QRF, not contractors. ETA 20 minutes. Can you hold? 20 minutes. An eternity when Taliban fighters were regrouping in the village, and a corrupt captain was positioning mercenaries to ensure no one survived. Yara keyed the radio. "Sentinel 6, Ghost. We will hold. But you need to understand what you are flying into. Holt has Black Ridge blocking the main road. You may face resistance from American contractors. There was a pause. Then Chen's voice came back, hard and certain. Let me worry about Black Ridge. You keep my Marines alive until I get there. Chen out. Yara looked at Brennan, then at Carrera, then at Thandie. 20 minutes, she said. We hold for 20 minutes. Around them, the surviving Marines began to reload, to redistribute ammunition, to prepare for the final push that they all knew was coming. The Taliban were massing in the village. Somewhere on the road, contractors were setting up to kill Americans. And the only thing standing between 40 surviving Marines and annihilation was a woman who had been betrayed by her own command. 20 minutes. Yara checked her rifle and settled into position. It was going to be the longest 20 minutes of her life. The Taliban came in waves. First, a probing attack from the east, testing the perimeter, drawing fire to identify where the Marines were strongest. Then a flanking movement from the south, fighters using the dry stream bed that Yara had identified hours ago from her ridge position. They were coordinating now, communicating, fighting with a discipline that suggested outside guidance. Yara moved along the line, directing fire, plugging gaps where wounded Marines could no longer hold their positions. She had fought in Fallujah and Ramadi and half a dozen villages whose names never made the news. She knew how to make 30 rifles sound like 60, how to create the illusion of strength when strength was running out. Brennan worked beside her, his earlier shame transformed into something harder and more useful. He was not seeking redemption through grand gestures. He was seeking it through competence, through being the gunnery sergeant his Marines needed him to be in this moment. Yara respected that more than any apology he could have offered. Thandie had positioned herself at the most exposed point of the perimeter, the place where the stream bed approach offered attackers their best chance of breaking through. She was not the same young woman who had been shaking behind a tire at the start of this nightmare. Something had crystallized in her when Rosewood died, something that would never fully soften again. Carrera found Yara during a brief lull in the fighting, his face grim. We are down to maybe 15 minutes of ammunition at current rate of fire. After that we are throwing rocks. Yara nodded. She had been counting rounds in her head, tracking the mathematics of survival. 15 minutes of ammunition. 18 minutes until Chen arrived. The gap was going to kill them. Then we need to slow them down another way, she said. What do we have for explosives? Carrera's eyes widened slightly as he understood what she was suggesting. We have some grenades. Maybe 4 claymores that were meant for the FOB. Demo charges for the vehicles if we needed to destroy them. Bring me the claymores and the demo charges. And find me Private Holt. Damon Holt arrived 2 minutes later, his uniform torn and bloodstained but his eyes clear. He had spent the last hour carrying ammunition and dragging wounded to cover, doing the unglamorous work that kept a unit fighting. Whatever privilege had defined his life before this valley, it was gone now. Private, Yara said, I need to know if you could do something difficult. Damon met her gaze without flinching. Tell me what you need, Gunnery Sergeant. Your uncle is trying to kill everyone in this convoy. You understand that now. The young man's jaw tightened. I understand. I'm going to set charges in the stream bed to slow the next assault. But I need someone to detonate them at exactly the right moment, from a position that is going to be very exposed. If I am wrong about the timing, or if I am wrong about you, a lot of Marines die. Damon was quiet for a moment. Yara could see him processing, could see the weight of what she was asking settling onto his shoulders. She was asking him to help kill men who were trying to reach his uncle. She was asking him to choose between blood and duty. My uncle, Damon said slowly, is responsible for this. For all of it. Rosewood is dead because of him. Those men on the ridge, the ones who died before we even knew what was happening, they are dead because of him. Yes. Then tell me where you need me. Yara allowed herself a moment of something that was not quite pride, but lived in the same neighborhood. She had not been wrong about the nephew. The corruption had not taken root. She showed him the position, explained the timing, handed him the detonator. Then she moved into the stream bed with Carrera, working fast to set the claymores and demo charges in a pattern that would turn the approach into a kill zone. They were halfway done when Thandie's voice crackled over the radio. Contact south. Heavy contact. They are making their push. Yara looked at Carrera. Go. I will finish here. He hesitated for just a moment, then nodded and ran toward the sound of gunfire. Yara worked alone in the stream bed, her hands steady despite the sounds of battle erupting around her, placing charges with the precision that 14 years had burned into her muscle memory. She was setting the last claymore when she heard movement behind her. The Taliban fighter had come through a gap in the rocks, silent and fast, his rifle raised. Yara saw him in her peripheral vision and knew she would not be able to bring her weapon up in time. The geometry was wrong. The angles did not work. She was going to die in a stream bed in Afghanistan, 30 feet from the Marines she had given everything to protect. The shot came from above. The fighter dropped, a neat hole in his forehead, and Yara looked up to see Thandie on the perimeter, her rifle still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. You taught me that shot, Thandie called down. The off-angle snapshot. You said I would need it someday. Yara felt something crack in her chest, something that had been frozen since the day they put her on that helicopter. Get back to your position, she shouted back. And thank you. She finished setting the charges and scrambled out of the stream bed as the Taliban assault intensified. Fighters were pouring from the village now. More than she had seen all day, a final desperate push to overrun the convoy before help could arrive. Damon was in position, detonator in hand, watching the stream bed with eyes that had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. Yara reached the perimeter and raised her rifle. Wait for my signal, she told him over the radio. Not until they are in the kill zone. Not until I tell you. The first fighters entered the stream bed, moving fast, confident that this approach was their path to victory. Yara counted. 10, 20, 30. Now, she said. Damon squeezed the detonator. The stream bed erupted in fire and thunder, claymores and demo charges detonating in a rippling cascade that turned 30 Taliban fighters into memory. The shock wave rolled across the valley, and for a moment everything was silent except for the ringing in Yara's ears. Then the surviving Marines began to cheer. 12 minutes until Chin arrived. And for the first time since the first RPG hit, Yara allowed herself to believe they might actually make it. The explosion had broken the Taliban assault, but it had also announced their desperation to everyone listening. Yara heard the Blackridge helicopter before she saw it, the rotors beating the air as it swung back toward the valley from the east. The damaged bird had found somewhere to land, somewhere to regroup, and now it was returning to finish what it had started. But it was not alone. A second helicopter appeared on the horizon, then a third, all bearing the matte black paint and civilian registration of private military contractors. Holt had called in reinforcements. Whatever resources Blackridge had in theater, he was throwing them at this valley to ensure no witness survived. Carrera saw them too. His face went pale. That is at least 30 operators plus air support. We cannot fight that. We do not have to fight them, Yara said. We just have to survive until Chin gets here. 8 minutes. 8 minutes against 3 helicopters and enough contractors to overwhelm what remained of the convoy. The mathematics had shifted again, and this time the numbers were impossible. Brennan rallied the Marines into the tightest defensive position possible, using the remaining vehicles as a fortress. The wounded were placed in the center, protected by rings of able bodies who had accepted that these might be their final minutes. There was no panic. These were Marines, and Marines did not panic. They simply prepared to make the enemy pay for every inch of ground. The lead Blackridge helicopter began its approach, Dorganer visible in the open bay, weapon trained on the convoy. The pilot was cautious this time, staying high enough to avoid the .50 caliber that had driven them off before. Carrera was already climbing into the turret, but Yara knew the angle was wrong. The helicopter had learned from its mistake. Then a voice crackled over the emergency frequency, cold and familiar. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo, this is Captain Holt. I am offering you one chance to end this without further bloodshed. Yara keyed her radio. I am listening. Surrender yourself and the evidence you claim to have. Do that, and I will allow the convoy to withdraw. The official record will show that you were killed during the ambush while operating outside your authority. Your Marines live. Your reputation is the only casualty. The offer hung in the air. Yara looked around at the faces of the men and women she had spent 3 years training, protecting, leading. They were watching her, waiting to see what she would do. Not one of them would have blamed her for accepting. Not one of them would have thought less of her for choosing their lives over her own. But they did not understand what her death would mean. If she surrendered, if the evidence disappeared, Holt would continue. More patrols would be compromised. More Marines would die in ambushes that were not accidents. The corruption would spread, protected by the silence of everyone who knew but chose to look away. Some prices were too high to pay. Negative, Captain, Yara transmitted. You're going to have to kill all of us. And when Major Chen arrives, she's going to find 40 Marines who died fighting American contractors on your orders. Good luck explaining that. Holt's response was silence. Then the helicopters began their attack run. The first bird swept low across the convoy, Doorgunner raking the vehicles with sustained fire. Marines pressed themselves into whatever cover they could find as rounds punched through metal and shattered glass. Someone was screaming. Someone was always screaming. Carrera opened up with a .50 caliber, forcing the helicopter to bank away, but the second and third birds were already moving to flank. They were coordinating, using overlapping fields of fire to keep the Marines pinned while contractors fast-stroked from the third helicopter onto the ridge overlooking the valley. Yara counted 12 operators hitting the ground, immediately spreading into fire teams and advancing toward the convoy. Professional, efficient, deadly. She had 1 magazine left. Around her, Marines were down to their last rounds. The defensive position that had held against Taliban waves was about to be overwhelmed by men with better training and better equipment. Thandi appeared at her side, blood running from a gash on her forehead. "Gunny, what do we do?" Yara looked at the young woman who had saved her life in the stream bed. She thought about Rosewood dying in these same arms. She thought about every Marine in this convoy who had trusted her, even when their own command had betrayed them. "We make them remember us," she said. "We make this cost them so much that they never forget what it took to bring us down." Thandi nodded once, then turned back to the perimeter with her rifle raised. The contractors were 300 meters out now, moving in tactical bounds, suppressing the convoy with precision fire while their teammates advanced. The helicopters continued their circling runs, keeping the Marines pinned, preventing any organized defense. Yara found Damon Holt crouched behind a wheel well, his rifle empty, his face streaked with dirt and tears. He was staring at the helicopters, at the men his uncle had sent to kill everyone in this valley, and something in his expression had shattered completely. "I did not know," he whispered. "I swear I did not know what he was." Yara knelt beside him. "I believe you. And when this is over, you're going to help me make sure everyone else knows too. If we survive." Yara almost smiled. "If we survive." The contractors were 200 meters out, 150. The helicopters were lining up for another pass. Ammunition was gone. Options were gone. And then Yara heard the most beautiful sound of her entire life. The roar of Marine Corps Cobra attack helicopters coming in fast from the west, their weapons already spooling up. Major Chen's voice cut through the chaos on the radio, sharp and furious. "Black Ridge Aircraft, this is United States Marine Corps. You are engaged in hostile action against American service members. Break off immediately or you will be destroyed. This is your only warning." The contractor helicopters hesitated. The men on the ground froze. Chen's Cobras did not hesitate. The lead bird launched a Hellfire missile that turned the nearest Black Ridge helicopter into a fireball, and suddenly the mathematics had changed one final time. Yara rose from cover, her empty rifle in her hands, and watched the sky fill with Marine Corps aircraft. Chen had arrived, and Vernon Holt's world was about to end. The Black Ridge contractors broke within 90 seconds. One helicopter was burning wreckage on the valley floor. The second took a burst from a Cobra's chain gun and limped toward the horizon, trailing smoke and flame. The third pilot made the smart choice and set his bird down hard, operators spilling out with their hands raised as Marine aircraft circled overhead. The men on the ground saw their air support vanish and understood immediately that the calculation had changed. They were private military not zealots. They fought for money, and dead men could not spend paychecks. One by one, they dropped their weapons and knelt in the Afghan dust. Major Cassandra Chen's convoy roared into the valley 10 minutes later, a column of armored vehicles and fresh Marines who spread through the area with the efficiency of a unit that knew exactly what it was doing. Corpsmen sprinted toward the wounded. Security teams secured the perimeter. And Chen herself dismounted from the lead vehicle and walked directly toward Yara. She was shorter than Yara had expected, compact and precise, with eyes that missed nothing. She stopped 3 feet away and studied the woman who had held this valley together with nothing but skill and stubbornness. "Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo," Chen said. "You look like hell." "Yes, ma'am," Yara replied. "It has been a long day." Chen's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "I monitored everything. Every transmission, every accusation, every order Holt gave. I have been suspicious of him for months, but I never had proof. Until today." Yara reached into her cargo pocket and pulled out the hard drive, still wrapped in plastic. "This is everything. Financial records, photographs, recorded communications. Enough to bury him." Chen took the drive carefully, as if it were made of glass. "This is going straight to the commanding general, along with my personal report on what I witnessed here today." She paused, looking around at the battered convoy, the exhausted Marines, the bodies that had been laid in rows and covered with ponchos. "How many did you lose?" she asked quietly. 11 confirmed, Yara said. "Another 8 wounded seriously enough to need evacuation." Chen nodded slowly. "And the contractors?" Yara glanced toward the men kneeling under guard. "For dead on the ridge. However many were in that helicopter. Those deaths are on Holt. Every single one." Chen's voice was hard. "He sent American contractors to kill American Marines. I do not care how connected his family is. He is finished." The word should have felt like victory. Instead, Yara felt hollow, scraped out, exhausted beyond anything she had experienced in 14 years of service. 11 Marines were dead. Young men and women who had trusted their leadership, who had followed orders, who had no idea that someone in their own chain of command was selling their lives for profit. Rosewood had been 19 years old. He had wanted his mother to know he was brave. Brennan approached, his face gray with fatigue, but his spine straight. "Major Chun, Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo, saved this convoy. She was not even supposed to be here. She stayed on her own, without orders, without support, because she knew something was wrong and she would not abandon us." Chun looked at Yara for a long moment. "I know, Gunnery Sergeant. I know exactly what she did." She turned to face the assembled Marines, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "Listen up. What happened here today is going to be investigated at the highest levels. Every one of you is a witness. Every one of you saw American contractors fire on American service members. That evidence, combined with what Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo has collected, is going to bring down everyone responsible for this." She paused, letting the words settle. "But right now I need to know, where's Captain Holt?" Silence. Then Carrera stepped forward. "Last transmission we monitored, he was still at FOB Copperhead. But that was 20 minutes ago. He knows his people failed. He knows we survived. He is running," Yara said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "He has a backup plan. He always has a backup plan. If he cannot control the narrative, he will disappear. Blackridge has resources, money, connections. If he gets out of theater, we might never find him." Chen's expression hardened. "Not on my watch." She keyed her radio and began issuing orders, locking down the FOB, grounding all aircraft securing the roads. Yara listened, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew Holt. She had spent weeks studying him, tracking his patterns, learning how he thought. He was arrogant, but he was not stupid. He would have anticipated the possibility of failure. He would have prepared. "Major," she said, cutting into Chen's transmission. "I need a vehicle and one person. I know where he is going." Chen studied her. "You are wounded, exhausted, and technically not even supposed to be in this country." "Yes, ma'am. Give me one good reason I should let you go after him instead of handling this through proper channels." Yara met her eyes. Because proper channels are how he has survived this long. Because he has connections that will slow everything down, create confusion, buy him time. And because I did not spend 3 weeks living in the dirt and watching my Marines get set up to die just to let him walk away. The silence stretched between them. Then she nodded once. Take Staff Sergeant Carrera. There is a vehicle staged at the north end of the convoy. You have 2 hours. After that, this becomes an official operation and you will stand down. Understood. Understood. Yara turned to find Carrera already moving toward her, rifle in hand, a look on his face that said he had been waiting for this moment since the day he watched her get put on that helicopter. Let's go get him, he said. Yara allowed herself one glance back at the convoy, at Thandi standing with her rifle, at Brennan organizing the wounded, at Damon Holt sitting alone with his head in his hands. Then she turned and walked toward the vehicle. Vernon Holt had started this. She was going to finish it. The road to FOB Copperhead was 18 kilometers of broken asphalt and dust, and Yara pushed the vehicle hard enough to feel the frame shudder beneath her. Carrera sat in the passenger seat, rifle across his knees, watching the terrain scroll past. He had not spoken since they left the valley, and Yara understood why. There were things that needed to be said between them, things that had been building since the day she was escorted off this very base. But words could wait. Holt could not. How did you know, Carrera finally asked, that he was dirty, before anyone else saw it? Yara kept her eyes on the road. Because I watched. Because I paid attention to patterns that did not make sense. 3 ambushes in 2 months, all on missions with restricted route information. All in locations where Blackridge just happened to have teams nearby. The first time could be coincidence. The second time was suspicious. The third time was enemy action. And you reported it. I reported it. 48 hours later, I was facing misconduct charges supported by evidence that appeared from nowhere. Carrera was quiet for a moment. I should have said something. When they were taking you away, I should have stood up. Yes, you should have. The words hung between them. Neither accusation nor forgiveness. Just truth. I'm not going to apologize, Carrera said. Apologies do not mean anything. But I'm going to spend the rest of my career making sure nothing like this ever happens again. To anyone. Yara glanced at him briefly. That is a start. FOB Copperhead appeared on the horizon. A cluster of concrete barriers and sandbag positions that looked small and fragile against the Afghan landscape. Yara could see activity at the gate, vehicles being stopped, personnel being checked. Chen's lockdown was in effect. But she also saw something else. A dust plume on the eastern road, moving away from the FOB at high speed. A single vehicle, heading toward a stretch of terrain that led nowhere except an abandoned airstrip that had been used by smugglers before the Marines arrived. That is him, she said. Carrera followed her gaze. How do you know? Because that airstrip is the only place within 50 kilometers where a small aircraft could land. And Blackridge has access to civilian aviation assets throughout the region. She turned the wheel hard, leaving the main road and cutting across open ground toward an intercept course. The vehicle bounced and lurched over rocks and ruts, but Yara did not slow down. Every second mattered now. The pursuit lasted 12 minutes. Holt's vehicle was faster on the road, but Yara knew the terrain better, had spent weeks moving through it on foot while she gathered her evidence. She cut corners he could not see, anticipated turns before he made them, and slowly closed the distance. They caught him 300 meters from the airstrip. Yara saw the small plane waiting on the cracked concrete, propellers already spinning, a pilot visible in the cockpit. She saw Holt's vehicle skid to a stop and the captain himself emerge, running toward the aircraft with a bag clutched in his hands. She did not slow down. The impact was controlled, precise, exactly what she intended. Her vehicle clipped the rear quarter of Holt's, sending it spinning into a drainage ditch and blocking the path to the plane. Yara was out before the dust settled, rifle raised, moving toward the man who had tried to kill 47 Marines to protect his secrets. Holt had been thrown clear of his vehicle. He was on his hands and knees in the dirt, blood running from a gash on his forehead, his bag torn open and papers scattered around him. He looked up as Yara approached, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. The fear of a man who had always believed his connections would protect him, and who was just now realizing that connections meant nothing out here. "Gunnery Sergeant," he said, his voice shaking. "We can discuss this. There are things you do not understand. Arrangements that benefit everyone." Yara stopped 3 feet away, her rifle pointed at his chest. "Stand up." He rose slowly, hands raised, still talking. "Blackridge is not the enemy. They provide services the military cannot. They save lives. The money, the arrangements, it was all to ensure better outcomes for everyone." "Better outcomes," Yara repeated. 11 Marines died today. Rosewood was 19 years old. He wanted his mother to know he was brave. That was not supposed to happen. The ambush was supposed to be contained. Blackridge was supposed to arrive in time. And when they did not, when your plan fell apart, you sent them to kill us all. Holt's mask cracked completely. His face twisted into something ugly, something that had always been there beneath the smooth politician's exterior. "You should have stayed gone. You should have taken the discharge and disappeared. None of this would have happened if you had just accepted your place." "My place," Yara said quietly. "You're a woman playing at being a warrior. You were never supposed to be here, never supposed to see what you saw, never supposed to understand. The system works because people like you do not ask questions." Yara felt something settle in her chest, a cold clarity that burned away the exhaustion and the grief and left only certainty. "You are right," she said. "I was never supposed to be here. I was supposed to go home and be quiet and let you keep selling Marines to the highest bidder. But I did not. And now 11 families are going to bury their children because you thought you were untouchable." She stepped closer, rifle still raised. "You're not untouchable, Captain. You're not special. You're just a man who forgot that some people cannot be bought and some women do not know their place." Carrera appeared beside her, zip ties in hand. "On your knees, Captain. Hands behind your head." Holt looked at the rifle, at Carrera, at the plane that was now taxiing away as the pilot decided that whatever he was being paid was not worth dying for. His shoulders slumped. He knelt in the Afghan dust, hands behind his head, and Yara watched as Carrera secured him with the same restraints that had probably been intended for her. "It is over," Carrera said. Yara lowered her rifle and looked at the man who had destroyed her career, murdered her Marines, and tried to bury the truth under bodies and lies. "Not yet," she said, "but soon." The drive back to FOB Copperhead was silent except for Holt's occasional attempts to negotiate. He offered money first, amounts that would have been life-changing for anyone who had grown up in Houston's Third Ward, who had watched her grandmother work double shifts just to keep the lights on. Yara did not respond. He offered information next. Names of other officers involved in similar arrangements, details about Blackridge operations throughout the region, intelligence that he claimed would be valuable to the right people. Yara did not respond. Finally, he offered threats. His family's connections, lawyers who would destroy her credibility, political allies who would ensure she never worked again, never recovered from the accusations he would level against her. Yara did not respond. She simply drove and let him talk himself into a deeper hole with every word. Carrera sat in the back with the prisoner, his expression carved from stone. Whatever respect he might have once had for the rank Holt wore had died in that valley with 11 Marines. Now, there was only the cold satisfaction of watching a corrupt man realize that his corruption had finally caught up with him. The FOB was chaos when they arrived. Military police had locked down every entrance and exit. Officers Yara did not recognize were interviewing personnel, collecting statements, securing evidence. A helicopter bearing the insignia of the commanding general staff sat on the landing pad, rotor still. Major Chin met them at the gate. Her eyes moved from Yara to the prisoner in the back seat, and something that might have been satisfaction flickered across her face. "You found him. He was trying to reach an airstrip east of here," Yara said. "Had a plane waiting." Chin nodded slowly. "The pilot landed at Kandahar 30 minutes ago. He is already in custody and talking as fast as he can. Apparently Blackridge promised him a significant bonus for this extraction. He is very eager to share everything he knows in exchange for consideration." Holt's face went gray. "That is hearsay." The word of a criminal pilot against a decorated officer. Captain Holt, Chen said coldly, at this moment you are facing charges that include conspiracy, accessory to murder, treason, and conduct unbecoming. The evidence against you includes financial records, recorded communications, testimony from surviving contractors, and the personal observations of over 30 Marines who watched your hired guns open fire on American service members. Whatever influence your family once had, it will not be enough to save you from this. She gestured to the military police standing nearby. Take him to the detention facility. He is to have no communication with anyone outside this base until the JAG investigation is complete. Holt tried to stand straight as they led him away, tried to maintain some dignity, but his legs were shaking and his eyes were wild. He looked back once at Yara, and the hatred in his gaze was pure and absolute. She met his stare without flinching. Let him hate. Hatred was all he had left. Chen waited until the prisoner was out of sight before turning back to Yara. The commanding general wants to speak with you. Both of you. Yara exchanged a glance with Carrera. Now. They followed Chen across the FOB to a command building that had been converted into a temporary headquarters. Inside, surrounded by staff officers and secure communications equipment, sat Lieutenant General Marcus Webb. He was a tall man, weathered by decades of service, with eyes that had seen enough to be surprised by nothing. He studied Yara for a long moment before speaking. Gunnery Sergeant Okonkwo, I have read Major Chen's preliminary report. I have reviewed the evidence you collected, and I have spoken with the Marines who survived that valley. Yara stood at attention, her body aching, her arm throbbing where the wound had reopened during the pursuit. Yes, sir. You were officially discharged from his command 3 weeks ago. You remained in theater without authorization, conducted an unauthorized surveillance operation against a superior officer, and engaged in combat operations while technically a civilian. Yes, sir. Webb leaned forward. You also single-handedly prevented the massacre of 47 Marines, exposed a conspiracy that has likely cost American lives across multiple deployments, and captured the officer responsible while he was attempting to flee justice. The general paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I have a problem, Gunnery Sergeant. Regulations say I should be court-martialing you for about 6 different violations. My conscience says I should be pinning a medal on your chest. And my pragmatic side says that the last thing the Marine Corps needs right now is a public trial that exposes how badly we failed to catch this before you did. Yara remained silent. There was nothing to say. Webb stood and walked around his desk until he was standing directly in front of her. Off the record, what you did was extraordinary. The courage, the skill, the sheer determination to protect your Marines even after your own command betrayed you. That is what this uniform is supposed to mean. He reached out and straightened a crease in her dusty, blood-stained sleeve, a gesture that was almost fatherly. On the record, your discharge has been voided due to procedural irregularities in the original charges. You never left the Marine Corps, Gunnery Sergeant. You've been on authorized leave while the investigation into Captain Holt proceeded. Do you understand? Yara felt something shift in her chest. The same thing that had cracked when Thandi saved her life. It was breaking open now, letting in light that she had not felt in weeks. I understand, sir. Good. Webb stepped back. Major Chun will handle the details. For now, I suggest you get that arm looked at and get some rest. You have earned it. Yara saluted. The general returned it crisply. And Gunnery Sergeant, Webb added as she turned to leave. The Marine Corps is better because you refused to give up on it, even when it gave up on you. Do not ever forget that. Yara walked out of the command building into the Afghan sunlight. Carrera was waiting outside, and when he saw her expression, he smiled for the first time since the ambush. Good news. Yara looked up at the sky, at the mountains in the distance, at the flag flying over the FOB. I am still a Marine, she said quietly. I'm still a Marine. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she believed it. 2 weeks later, Yara stood at attention in the morning sun while the names of the fallen were read aloud. The memorial service was held at FOB Copperhead, in the shadow of the mountains where 11 Marines had given everything. Boots and rifles and helmets stood in silent rows, each one representing a life that had ended in that valley. Each one representing a family that would never be whole again. Lance Corporal Ilya Rosewood, 19 years old, Houston, Texas. Yara kept her eyes forward as the chaplain spoke, but her mind was in the stream bed, holding a dying boy's gaze so he would not have to leave alone. She had written to his mother, had told her that her son was brave, that he had fought with honor, that his last thoughts had been of home. The letter had taken her 3 hours to write, and she had rewritten it 11 times, and it still felt insufficient. Some debts could never be repaid. Some losses could never be made right. All you could do was remember and make sure the sacrifice meant something. After the ceremony, Marines lingered in small groups, sharing stories about the fallen, finding comfort in each other's presence. Yara watched from a distance, feeling the familiar weight of command that separated her from the people she had sworn to protect. Thandi found her standing alone near the perimeter. The young Lance Corporal looked different now. The softness that had defined her face when Yara first met her was gone, replaced by something harder and more certain. Where did that? Lost did that. But there was also a steadiness in her eyes that had not been there before, a quiet confidence that came from having faced the worst and survived. "I'll put in my request," Thandi said. 4 Scout Sniper Assessment. Yara turned to look at her. "That is a difficult road." "I know." Thandi paused. "I had a good teacher." The words hung between them, carrying more weight than their simplicity suggested. Yara remembered a young Marine who had been shaking behind a tire, who had cried when her mentor was taken away, who had saved that same mentor's life with a shot she had learned in training. "You will do well," Yara said. "Just remember that the rifle is only part of it. The rest is up here." She tapped her temple. "And here." She touched her chest. "Do not ever let anyone make you forget that." Thandi nodded slowly. "What about you, Gunny? What happens now?" Yara looked out at the mountains, at the landscape that had nearly become her grave. "I have been offered a position at Quantico, training the next generation of scout snipers. Apparently someone decided I have experience worth sharing." "That is stateside." "Yes." Thandi was quiet for a moment. "You have earned it." Going home. Yara thought about home, about her grandmother's house in Houston, the one she had not visited in almost 2 years, about the life she had put on hold for 14 years of service, about what it might mean to sleep without listening for mortars, to walk without scanning for threats, to exist without the constant weight of responsibility for other people's lives. "Maybe," she said. "We will see." Brennan approached as Thandi moved away to rejoin her unit. The gunnery sergeant looked older than he had 2 weeks ago, the gray in his hair more prominent, the lines around his eyes deeper. Carrying the dead did that to a person. "I submitted my statement to the JAG investigators," he said. "Told them everything. How Holt railroaded you. How I stood by and let it happen. How you saved us anyway." Yara nodded. "That took courage." "No." Brennan shook his head. "Courage would have been speaking up when it mattered. What I did was just honesty, 3 weeks too late." He extended his hand. She took it. "If you ever need anything," he said, "anything at all, you know where to find me." They stood there for a moment, 2 Marines who had seen the worst of what their institution could produce and had somehow found a way to still believe in what it was supposed to be. Then Brennan released her hand and walked away to tend to his Marines. Carrera was the last to find her. He had a duffel bag over his shoulder and transport orders in his pocket. Reassignment to Camp Lejeune, away from the shadows of what had happened here. "I heard about Quantico," he said. "Instructor duty. Big step. Someone has to teach them how to shoot," Yara replied. Carrera smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You know, I spent 18 months as your spotter. Watched you make shots that should have been impossible. Learned more from you than I did in all my years of training before that." He paused, looking for words. "What I'm trying to say is that you made me a better Marine. And I'm sorry I was not a better friend when you needed one." Yara felt the last frozen piece of herself finally thaw. The anger she had carried for 3 weeks, the betrayal, the isolation. It did not disappear, but it loosened its grip, made room for something else. "You are here now," she said. "That counts for something." Carrera nodded once, then turned and walked toward the transport that would take him away from this place. Yara stood alone in the FOB, surrounded by the sounds of a military base continuing its mission. Helicopters lifting off, vehicles moving, Marines training for the next fight and the one after that. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her father's knife. The blade that had killed a contractor on an Afghan ridge. The blade that had been carried in Somalia by a man who never came home. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of generations of sacrifice, of duty that transcended any single life. Her father had died serving. Her grandmother had raised her alone. And Yara had spent 14 years trying to honor both of them by being the kind of Marine who did not look away when something was wrong. She had almost lost everything. Her career, her freedom, her life. But she had not lost herself. She had not lost her Marines. And she had not lost the truth. If you connected with this story, drop a comment about what resonated most with you. Maybe you know someone who stood alone against injustice, or a woman who proved every doubter wrong. Share your story. We would love to hear it. Yara slid the knife back in her pocket and looked toward the west, toward home, toward whatever came next. She was still a Marine. She was still standing. And she was finally ready to find out who she could be when she was not fighting for survival. The mountains watched in silence as Gunnery Sergeant Yara Okonkwo walked toward the transport that would carry her home. A ghost no longer, just a Marine, going home.